They say power makes you untouchable. That when you stand at the top, no one can shake you. I believed that once. Until the day I realized that my greatest enemy had been sleeping in my own bed. For 20 years, I built an empire with my own 2 hands. Every decision, every calculated risk had been a step toward complete control. I didn't inherit wealth, I created it. My shipping and logistics company spanned continents, my name carried weight in boardrooms and political circles alike. I was the man people feared, respected, envied. And yet, in the quiet safety of my own home, I was blind. The truth didn't come to me through whispers or suspicion. It came from the most innocent source imaginable, my 9-year-old son. Leo burst into my office that afternoon, his small hands gripping his mother's tablet like it was some kind of treasure. He was too young to understand the weight of what he had found. Too young to realize that one word, a single question, could shatter everything. "Dad, what's a prenup?" The world didn't just slow, it stopped. For a man who had spent his life anticipating moves before they were made, I had never felt more unprepared. My hands were steady as I took the tablet, but inside, something primal had awakened. A deep, gut-wrenching certainty that whatever I was about to see would change everything. And it did. The email chain was there, plain as day. Helena. My wife. The woman I had once loved with the same intensity one now reserved for power. She had been planning her escape, waiting for the moment my father's inheritance would come through so she could take what she believed was hers. Not just money. Not just assets. She wanted to take me down. And she wasn't working alone. Her lover, Noah Langston, had been by my side for years. A trusted employee, a so-called friend, someone I had given opportunity after opportunity. He was nothing before I brought him into my company. Now, he was plotting against me, standing alongside my wife in a carefully orchestrated betrayal. I could feel Leo's eyes on me, watching, waiting for a reaction. I forced my expression into something unreadable, pressing the tablet back into his hands. "Why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a bit, son?" He didn't argue. He never did. As soon as he was gone, I moved. The kind of movement that comes from instinct, from years of operating in a world where hesitation is the difference between survival and destruction. By the time I reached our penthouse, Helena was lounging on a chaise, flipping through a fashion magazine like she didn't have a single worry in the world. The sight of her, the casual elegance, the self-satisfied ease, made my blood turn to ice. She had underestimated me. She had assumed I would never find out. That I would be too focused on my empire to notice the enemy lying beside me each night. She was wrong. I tossed the tablet onto the table in front of her. Watched as her face paled, as her fingers clenched around the glossy pages of her magazine. There was no need for words. She knew. Still, she tried. There was always an excuse, always a justification. I let her talk, let her spin her web of weak explanations. But none of it mattered. Because I had already won. With deliberate calm, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. A few taps, and the screen lit up with a collection of damning images. Helena. Noah. Together. She had thought she was the only one with secrets. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And that's when I smiled. "You won't get a dime." I said it softly, almost kindly. But the weight of those words crushed her. Because she knew the terms of the prenup just as well as I did. Infidelity voided everything. She had played the game, but she had lost. Helena's silence was deafening, but I wasn't finished. "Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." For the first time in years, I saw real fear in her eyes. But it was too late. I turned and walked away, leaving her to scramble for a way out of a checkmate she never saw coming. But as I stepped into the elevator, my mind was already elsewhere. Because Helena wasn't the only problem. Noah Langston had betrayed me, too. And betrayal, in my world, had consequences. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. People don't like to lose, especially those who think they're smarter than everyone else. Helena had spent years playing a game she thought she controlled, carefully weaving her plans in the shadows, believing I was too blind to see. And now, stripped of everything, humiliated and cast out, she had only one move left: revenge. I expected retaliation. I counted on it. What I didn't expect was how quickly and ruthlessly she struck. It started with whispers. Rumors spread through my industry like wildfire, painting me as the villain, a cold and ruthless businessman who crushed anyone who stood in his way. She fed the media stories, some exaggerated, some twisted versions of the truth, and some outright lies. Soon, articles began appearing with damning headlines about my company's aggressive business tactics, about my personal life, about how I had, heartlessly, thrown my wife out with nothing. I could have ignored the rumors. Bad press was temporary. But then the real attack came. Noah Langston, the man I had once trusted with my company's most valuable assets, wasn't content to simply lick his wounds in the shadows. He wanted blood. The first sign of his betrayal came through my security team, a few small anomalies in our systems. At first, it seemed insignificant: some files accessed remotely, a few unauthorized logins. Nothing major. Then, within hours, it escalated. Confidential contracts were leaked. Shipping routes were exposed. Key financial reports, the kind that could shake investor confidence, landed in the hands of my biggest competitors. It was an all-out assault, and I had no doubt Noah was the one behind it. He had worked beside me for years. He knew the structure of my empire inside and out. And now, he was using that knowledge to burn it down. By the time I fully understood the extent of the damage, my company was bleeding. Our stock took a hit. Calls from board members became more frantic. Partners hesitated. Investors demanded explanations. And that's when the wolves smelled blood. My secretary's voice came through the intercom, tense and uncertain. "Mr. Romano, Viktor Kamarov is on the line. He says it's urgent." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Kamarov had been waiting for this moment for years. A Russian magnate with deep political connections and an even deeper hunger for power, Kamarov had spent the last decade circling my company like a vulture. He didn't just acquire companies, he consumed them, leaving nothing behind but scraps. I had shut down every one of his previous offers, refusing to let him gain any foothold in my market. But now, he saw an opportunity. I picked up the phone, my voice cool and controlled. "Kamarov." "Dante," he said smoothly, his accent thick, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about your recent difficulties. Perhaps now is the right time to discuss a partnership?" A partnership. That's what he called it. I could almost hear the amusement in his voice, the smug satisfaction of a predator that thinks its prey is cornered. "My company isn't for sale." "Not yet," Kamarov replied. I ended the call. But I knew this was far from over. Helena and Noah had opened the floodgates, and now, Kamarov was stepping in, ready to finish what they started. I stood at my office window, staring down at the city below. The skyline was a monument to everything I had built. Every deal, every battle, every risk I had taken, it had all led to this. And now, the people I had once trusted were trying to take it from me. They had underestimated me. I turned back to my desk and picked up the phone. "Get me Liam Vance." Liam was the kind of man you called when you needed information, real information. The kind that never made it into newspapers or police reports. He worked in the shadows, digging up secrets, exposing the weak points no one thought existed. When his voice came on the line, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Find out everything on Helena, Noah, and Kamarov. I don't want speculation. I want proof. Transactions. Conversations. Every deal they've made since this started. I want to know what they've done, what they're planning, and what their weaknesses are." Liam didn't ask questions. He never did. As I hung up, I knew what came next. Helena thought she could turn the world against me. Noah thought he could dismantle my empire. Kamarov thought he could swoop in and claim victory. They all thought I was vulnerable. They thought I was cornered. They forgot who I was. This wasn't just about protecting my company anymore. This was about revenge. And I always win. The thing about war is that it's never won by defense alone. You don't survive by waiting for the next attack. You strike first, strike hard, and make sure your enemies don't get back up. By the time Liam Vance delivered his report, I already knew what had to be done. I had spent years studying the men and women I worked with, cataloging their weaknesses, their ambitions, their fears. Now, all I needed was confirmation of what I already suspected. The file he handed me was thick, filled with the kind of evidence that turned accusations into convictions. Every page detailed the betrayal I had already felt in my gut. Helena had been siphoning money into offshore accounts for months. Noah had been feeding confidential information to my competitors, dismantling my company from the inside. And Kamarov? He had been financing the entire operation, standing in the shadows, waiting for me to fall so he could feast on the remains. They hadn't just tried to hurt me. They had tried to destroy me. I went through every document, every transaction, every message exchanged between them. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in their actions. They had planned this meticulously, believing I would be too distracted to notice, too slow to react. They had underestimated me. The financial damage was severe, but not irreparable. My stock had taken a hit, investors were rattled, and some of my biggest clients were considering jumping ship. Noah's leaks had given my competitors an advantage, allowing them to undercut my contracts, reroute shipments, and weaken the foundation of what I had built. But it wasn't just business. This was personal. They had taken my trust, my loyalty, my years of careful planning, and turned it against me. They had positioned themselves as the victors before the battle was even over. That was their first mistake. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. Every second wasted was another inch they gained, another piece of my empire slipping through my fingers. First, I moved on Helena. The prenup had left her with nothing, but she had found other ways to secure her future: private accounts, hidden transactions, payments disguised as business expenses. With a few strategic calls, those accounts were frozen. The money she had stolen was pulled back into my control before she even realized it was gone. She had made herself comfortable, thinking she had time to regroup, to rebuild. But by the time she checked her balance, she would find herself exactly where I had left her, at zero. Next was Noah. His name was still attached to several major deals within my company. Cutting him off wasn't enough. He needed to be erased. With one order, his access was revoked, every password changed, every connection severed. But that wasn't enough. Noah had been reckless, leaving behind a trail of messages, records, and illegal transactions that were all neatly documented in the file Liam had given me. That evidence didn't just disappear, it found its way to the right hands. The authorities, the media, his business contacts. His reputation wouldn't just be damaged, it would be unsalvageable. He had tried to cripple my company. Now I would make sure he never worked in this industry again. Then there was Kamarov. Unlike Helena and Noah, he wasn't desperate. He wasn't emotional. He was calculated, patient, and dangerous. He had spent years waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and now that moment had arrived. But he had made a mistake. He thought this was a negotiation. That he could back me into a corner, weaken me, and force my hand. He had already begun reaching out to my partners, offering them deals, convincing them that my downfall was inevitable. But power wasn't just about money. It was about leverage. And I had plenty. I dug into Kamarov's empire the same way he had dug into mine. His businesses, his associates, his offshore dealings. He wasn't invincible. He had weaknesses. And now they were mine to use. With the right pressure, his investors began to waver. His allies hesitated. His perfect plan started to unravel before his eyes. He had come for my empire. Now, I was going to burn his to the ground. As I stood in my office, Looking out over the city, I knew this fight wasn't over. Helena and Noah had lost. Kamarov was still standing, still pushing forward, still playing his game. But he had made one fatal mistake. He thought I played fair. Betrayal isn't a single act. It's a slow poison, creeping through every corner of your life until nothing remains untouched. I had stripped Helena of everything: her money, her security, her carefully laid out plans. Noah was finished, left scrambling as his career crumbled. Kamarov was still standing, but for how long? The cracks were forming, and soon, I'd make sure he collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. I thought I had won, that I had outmaneuvered them all. But I should have known better. People like them don't just accept defeat. Helena still had one card left to play. And she played it perfectly. It started subtly, whispers that made their way to me through my lawyers and my most trusted employees. Concerned glances, hesitant conversations, vague mentions of legal filings. At first, I brushed it off. She had nothing left, no power, no resources. But then, the truth hit with the force of a hammer. She had filed for full custody of Leo. Not just a request, not just a desperate plea. It was a full-scale legal assault, carefully constructed to make me look like the villain. The accusations were brutal, painting me as an unstable influence, an absent father too consumed by power and business to care for his own son. She had fabricated stories of my temper, twisted my business dealings into something dark and dangerous, and presented herself as the devoted mother, the only safe option for Leo's future. It was a move I hadn't anticipated, and that was my mistake. I had been focused on winning the war in business, dismantling my enemies piece by piece, but she had gone after something I never considered a battleground. Money, power, I could fight those battles with ease. But my son? That was a war I wasn't prepared to lose. The legal process moved fast. Helena had played her hand well, aligning herself with the right people, ensuring that the media turned her into the wronged woman, the mother fighting against a ruthless businessman. Headlines started appearing, painting me as a man too obsessed with control to be a good father. My legal team assured me that these were just tactics, that the truth would win in the end, but I knew better. Perception mattered. And Helena was doing everything in her power to manipulate it. In the middle of it all was Leo. He was too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, but he felt the tension. He heard the whispers at school, saw the way people looked at him differently. At home, I could see the change, the way he hesitated before speaking, the way he watched me as if trying to figure out if the things being said about me were true. That hesitation, that doubt, was something I couldn't allow. While my legal team built our defense, I did what I had always done best, played the long game. Helena had been careful, but not careful enough. She had underestimated just how much I knew, how many loose ends she had left untied. The affair with Noah was only the beginning. I had evidence of her offshore accounts, records of her funneling stolen money, copies of the emails where she had detailed her plans to take me down. I had enough proof to dismantle her carefully crafted image piece by piece. I didn't want to use it. Not like this. Not against the mother of my son. But she had left me no choice. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled to capacity. The press lined the hallways, eager for the latest development in a case that had turned into a public spectacle. Helena sat across from me, poised and composed, her expression one of quiet confidence. She thought she had won before the hearing even started. She thought she had built an unbreakable case. She had no idea what was about to happen. My lawyers laid out the facts with surgical precision. One by one, they dismantled her claims, presenting hard evidence that turned her accusations into blatant lies. The offshore accounts, the stolen money, the leaked correspondences where she had planned to manipulate Leo into resenting me. It was all there, undeniable and damning. The room shifted. The judge, who had remained neutral throughout, suddenly regarded Helena with something close to disdain. And just like that, the story changed. She was no longer the devoted mother fighting for her child's best interests. She was a liar, a manipulator, A woman who had tried to use her own son as a weapon in her war against me. And when the final ruling was handed down, it was over. Custody was awarded to me. Helena was granted supervised visitation, pending further review. She didn't react, at least not visibly. But I saw the way her hands clenched, the way her carefully constructed facade cracked for just a moment. She had played her final card, and she had lost. As I walked out of the courthouse, Leo's small hand in mine, the cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions I didn't bother answering. It didn't matter what they said. The truth had won. My son was safe. But as I stepped into the waiting car, something in the back of my mind remained unsettled. This wasn't over. I could feel it. The battle with Helena had ended, but there was still one final war left to fight. Because in the background, behind the chaos, Kamarov was still watching. He had been waiting, biding his time, letting me deal with my personal battles. But now, he was ready. And I knew, he was preparing his final move. Winning custody of Leo should have been the end of it. The courtroom victory should have been the final chapter in this war, the moment I could finally breathe, move forward, and rebuild. But I knew better. Helena had been a distraction, a personal war that had nearly consumed me. The real threat had never left. Kamarov had been waiting in the shadows, watching as I fought my battles, letting me exhaust myself. Now, with Helena defeated and Noah destroyed, he was ready to strike. The first hit came fast. A series of cyber attacks crippled my logistics network overnight. Orders were delayed, shipments disappeared from tracking systems, and clients panicked. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. My security team worked around the clock to contain the breach, but the damage had already been done. The media caught wind of it, and suddenly, headlines screamed about the instability of my company. Investors started pulling back, and the stock plummeted. Then, the lawsuits came. Environmental violations, labor disputes, claims of financial misconduct. Kamarov had weaponized every legal loophole he could find. He wasn't just trying to hurt me. He was trying to drown me. The sheer volume of legal attacks made it clear that this wasn't about business. This was about annihilation. And then came the final move, the one that made it personal. Leo was home with my security team when the alarm system was triggered. A breach. Not a hacker, not a data leak, but something physical. By the time I got the call, my team had already neutralized the intruder. A man, masked, dressed in black, had been caught trying to enter through the side entrance of my estate. He hadn't been armed. He hadn't even fought back. He had only one job, to send a message. Kamarov wasn't after my company anymore. He was after my family. The next morning, I sat in my office, watching the city from my window, my mind already forming a strategy. This wasn't just business anymore. Kamarov had broken the one rule I still held sacred. He had tried to use my son as leverage. That was something I would never forgive. Liam Vance sat across from me, his usual smirk replaced by something harder. The file in his hands contained everything I needed. Kamarov thought he was untouchable, but no one was untouchable. His empire had cracks, weaknesses. Offshore accounts tied to money laundering. Bribery trails leading to corrupt officials. Ties to criminal organizations that even he couldn't afford to have exposed. He had spent years covering his tracks, but he had underestimated the lengths I was willing to go. By the time we were finished, the counterattack was already in motion. Every legal suit he had filed against me was met with evidence of his own crimes. The authorities raided his offices, freezing his assets before he could move them. His investors fled, his allies turned on him, and the empire he had spent decades building collapsed in real time. But I wasn't done. Kamarov was still out there. And I wasn't going to wait for him to make another move. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom, wasn't on a legal battlefield. It happened in a dimly lit private club, a place where men like Kamarov once felt invincible. I walked in alone. I didn't need security. He was already a dead man walking. He sat at the far end of the room, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression calm but his eyes filled with something darker. He knew why I was here. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The war between us had been fought through pawns, through money, through power plays. But now, it was just the two of us. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp. It's over. Kamarov exhaled slowly, swirling the whiskey in his glass. You think you've won? He chuckled, though there was no humor in it. I'll rebuild. You can't destroy a man like me. I smiled. Not a smirk, not amusement, just cold certainty. I already have. And he knew it. The news broke the next morning. Kamarov had fled the country. His assets were gone, his political connections had abandoned him, and his name was forever tied to the scandals that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was finished. And I had won. That night, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the city that was mine once again. Leo joined me, sitting beside me, quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. Is it over now? I glanced at him, the weight of everything settling into my bones. Yeah, kid. It's over. But as I looked at him, at the way he studied me with something between admiration and unease, I realized something. I had fought for this, bled for it, torn my enemies apart to protect what was mine. But in the process, I had shown my son exactly what kind of man I was. And one day, he would have to decide if he wanted to be just like me.